Well, let's talk about Brandon Aiyuk. There's obviously a lot of rumors about Brandon Aiyuk, and I feel like we've talked about this every way that we possibly can, but the rumors are not stopping. And so the question is just simple. What should the 49ers do about Brandon Aiyuk? It is the most tradable asset that they have. If they get rid of him, there's no cap hit. He's young. He's coming off of a all-pro year, second team all-pro year. Probably get a nice little haul for him. But should they get rid of him is the question. So let's make it a two-parter. Should they get rid of him, and will they get rid of him? We'll start with should they get rid of him, Sunil?
Yeah, and I understand both sides of this. Obviously, we've seen someone who maybe by definition, Jesse has had much more successful of a career than Brandon Aiyuk and Tyreek Hill be like, traded for with Kansas City, traded him to Miami, and then Kansas City goes off and reels off 2 straight Super Bowls after trading, an all pro game changer, MVP quality wide receiver in Tyreek Hill. The difference that I see in that situation and this situation is Brock Purdy isn't Patrick Mahomes. And even though I like Brock Purdy and I do think that, he's the quarterback of the future here, he definitely isn't the elevator that Mahomes is, where Mahomes could get away with that. And probably to a certain extent, me being a Kyle Shanahan fan, I still think Andy Reid is a better coach than Kyle Shanahan, right? So that combination, I think, can do more than possibly what the 49ers might be able to do. I am super high on Brandon Aiyuk. I've already stated on this show and many other shows, I think that he has the potential to be a top 3 receiver in 49er history, which obviously we know some of the great receivers that have come down, this franchise. To me, I think they're in a unique situation where, so to answer your question directly, I don't think they should. And the reason for that is because eventually they're going to have to make a decision between Debo and Brandon Aiyuk. I don't think that the decision has to be made this year. I do think it needs to be made in 2025. And I think that decision is going to be extremely easy to make, right? So to me, I understand you can't keep both of those players. So I would trade Debo in 2025. However, when we're talking about just this season and him being the most tradable asset, what are you going to do with that asset, with those assets, right? If it's go in and try to find another Brandon Aiyuk, well, you already have a Brandon Aiyuk. If it's to use those assets to go fill multiple positions, maybe, but I don't think more draft picks necessarily is what the 49ers need right now. They have 11, right? So unless they're getting 2 high round picks, Jesse, like a first and a second or 2 seconds, something like that, to me, more draft picks doesn't really solve the issue. And I think financially, you solve for that by getting rid of Debo when his contract becomes more tradable or cuttable.
Yeah, I agree with you. The 49ers are not in cap hell, not yet, anyways. And I think the way that these contracts are going to work out in the age of some of these players, I don't think that they'll be in cap hell for a while. I mean, I know they're going to have to pay Purdy, and if they pay Aiyuk, things can get squirrely. But a lot of these guys, we've talked about it all season, really. We've talked about how going into 2025, things are going to be very different with this team. And Brandon Aiyuk is a guy that, in my opinion, you have to keep, because you're right. Brock Purdy's not the elevator that Patrick Mahomes is, or maybe some of these other guys. And so with that, wouldn't you want to build with Brandon Aiyuk and Brock Purdy and allow guys like Kittle to fall off eventually, Debo, who's older, to fall off eventually, and try to replace them as you go, versus getting rid of your youngest, healthiest, arguably best young asset that you have on this team? That doesn't make any sense. So keep Brandon Aiyuk. Do not trade him. There's no reason to do it. You're not against it cap wise, in my opinion. And I don't think they're going to trade him either, Sunil. I really don't. I mean, I know that there's a lot of conversations about it, but I think the 49ers are smart enough to look at it in a similar way that we are, knowing that Brandon Aiyuk has a lot of years in front of him. He's a pure wide receiver. He can grow with Brock Purdy. And as these years pass, he will move up the depth chart as far as what weapon he is. You know, he may be weapon number 3 now, but he's soon going to be weapon 2 and even 1. You got to keep Brandon Aiyuk around. So no, don't trade Brandon Aiyuk, and I don't think they're going to trade Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah, I agree with you because, if Kyle Shanahan is anything that I believe he is, and I think a lot of people do believe, obviously offensively, there's people right now that may not think that he knows what he's doing. But to me, you look at Brandon Ayuk, and when you could get the type of production out of him with how little he's being used compared to the people that have similar numbers to him, like it's untapped. He's gotten better every single year. He brings more than just his receiving ability because he's one of the best blocking receivers in the game, if not the best. He's a great locker room guy. And ultimately, if you give him more opportunities, those numbers are going to just go up. And those are the type of, I think, assets that you just don't want to give up unless something ridiculous comes down the line. And when I mean ridiculous, I mean like high round picks, multiple high round picks, because once again, you got to look at it situationally. The 49ers aren't a team that are lacking draft picks, right? This is a year where we have our first round draft pick, we have our second round draft pick, and then we have 9 other draft picks as well. You know what I mean? So if it's just gonna allot like another third round and a fifth round or a second and a late round pick, like does that really bring back what we need to elevate this team? I would say no. I think you're actually losing more with Ayuk than what you're gaining with whatever second round draft pick and late round draft pick you might get for that.
Well, and rookie wide receivers a lot of times don't produce for any teams, let alone a Kyle Shanahan team. I mean, his preference is not to play a lot of rookies, especially at the wide receiver position. And you've heard guys like Jerry Rice and some of these other greats say that it's very hard to come in and just be great right away at the wide receiver position, especially in a complex offense like this one. So I don't think that that's the move. This team is still trying to win a Super Bowl this next year. And even if it gets contentious and BA has to play out his 5th-year deal and you franchise tag him and figure out a trade after that, then do that. But you're trying to win this next year. You're trying to be the best possible team you can be this next year. That includes keeping BA. That does not mean moving on from BA. So to me, it's a pretty easy choice.
And yeah, and absolutely. I think even if you look at just a production wise, you would expect Debo, Kittle, maybe even CMC to maybe take a little bit of descending, as far as their stats, especially Kittle and Debo. We know Debo's still struggling to stay healthy throughout the whole season. You expect Kittle to possibly be, have already reached his peak and is probably going to get less and less production. The only asset that you have that's still ascending, where you still haven't reached his full potential, is Brandon Aiyuk. So if you are looking to win, which I do think, and we'll get into that when we're talking about strategy next. But if you're going all in again this year, as it's your best shot, like that's the one player that it's like you want him back, right? You're not going to be able to just replace him in the draft, especially with the all-pro season that he just put up. And his all-pro season, I think, is a little bit different than the Debo season because it wasn't just doubled up of the previous year, right? It was a gradual, like you saw the growth year after year after year, where you believe that he can continue to do this, if not even get better with more opportunity.